Now let's move on to the next topic. We will talk about the possibility of changing a control's type so that it looks and behaves in a different way than the default one. The control type is a property of controls that affects the way in which a control will be displayed and used. The properties shown to be configured depend on the selected type. Here, we have an example of a control type for a grid control. To offer the event's participants a list of nearby restaurants that offer discounts, we've created the restaurant transaction. If we don't want the grid that implements the list of restaurants, that is to say, the work with for restaurants, and if we want that to not be displayed in the standard manner, like we're seeing here in this screen, and instead, we want it to be displayed as locations or pins on a map, like this, then we can change the grid's control type to SD maps. Because we have a restaurant geolocation attribute for each restaurant, which saves longitude and latitude data. So with these coordinates, the grid will be displayed in this way. The device's Maps app will be used, for Android, it'll be Google Maps. Remember that to be able to use it, we need a Google API key corresponding to our app signature. If we don't have that key, the maps will not be displayed at runtime. Even if we set this property, the standard grid will be displayed. Here we can see that we've entered the SD Maps control type, and a group of properties to configure will be opened. One of them, Location Attribute, is mandatory. That is to say, the geographic locations of each restaurant to show on the map will be taken from there. The key that we talked about can be obtained rather easily from Google by registering the app we're developing. To learn how to obtain the API key, we recommend visiting our wiki. How to get an API key from Google. There you will find simple steps to do it. But where is this key configured? In GeneXus, we open the restaurant transaction, Work with for smart devices, Preferences. Within the smart device generator, we can sign the Android app with these values. To do so, we need to enter that key we configured and that was provided by Google. With this key, the maps will work. Let's open the emulator, and we can see that we're already running the Work With component for restaurants. We will change its name so that it reads Restaurant instead of Work With. That is to say, in the list node, we see the captions, and replace the existing one with Restaurants. Because we're using live editing, you'll notice it has been automatically changed. We want to make this change, so we open the grid. In the properties, below the control info group, the control type property is empty. Opening the combo shows all the possible options offered for a grid. That is to say, the possible ways in which it can be shown and used in addition to the standard manner. So we choose SD Maps, and all these properties are opened. And here, the restaurant geolocation attribute is being displayed because it had been tested before. Otherwise, it would be displayed in this other way, which I'll show you now. So let's open the emulator, and we can see that it says we need Google Play services. Since we don't have them, the easiest solution is to use an actual device, which is what we'll do. So let's connect the device directly to the computer. In this way, in the next F5 or run over the main object, the application will be opened directly on the phone. I'll connect the USB cable to the computer. It recognizes it. We will open the event day object and select Run. And we'll see that when it's complete, it's opened directly on the device. This is the most interesting prototyping option because all the device's features are available, unlike the emulator that does not allow using all its features. This means that when the device is connected to the computer, I don't have to read the QR code or install the PQ every time I need to run a simple test. In addition, live editing will be listening to the application. Note that it has already been opened there, and if I tap on the restaurants, they're displayed as points on the map. If we expand those points on the map, we can see that the grid line information is displayed, and if we tap on that information, the detail is opened. Here's another example. Here we can see how a session's speakers can be shown as an SD horizontal grid. And here is where each item on the grid is displayed as a column that will be horizontal instead of vertical. The page size has been configured as 3, which means that 3 items, 3 columns, will be loaded per page, and it will be necessary to horizontally scroll to view the next page. In addition, in this case, the controller has been removed through the Show Page Controller property. We go to GeneXus to show this at runtime. Here we select Run, but we open the emulator. However, once again, having the device connected to the computer will be more convenient for your daily work. Now let's go to the emulator, and we open the details of a session that we know has several speakers. We see that it has been implemented as a grid that shows the speaker's photo and full name. Here we're viewing it in the standard manner. We will open the grid now, and in the properties, we will change the control type by selecting SD horizontal grid. As a result, in the emulator, we should view the grid in this other way, in a horizontal manner. So, Here we've seen all the possible options for a grid control type. For more information about these and other control types, visit our wiki. This is an example of the control type for grids, the SD matrix grid. It allows using a sort of bidimensional table. For example, this table shows the programming of a Mexican TV channel for a tablet in this case. We can see that the bidimensional table is displayed in that central area. Note that many properties are displayed when this control type is selected. They set the X and Y axis, the information that will be shown, the sizes of each cell, and so on. We will even be able to set a row with a different behavior, as shown in the image. It's a bidimensional table where we can configure how the data loaded in that grid will be displayed. The control is still a grid, but it will be displayed in this other way. This is not only valid for grid controls. The controls of attribute variable type also have the control type property to change the default behavior. The types offered depend on the control data type. Here we can see how we can have the user enter a star rating for the restaurant rating attribute. This is a numeric attribute. By selecting the rating value as control type of the attribute, these two properties will be opened to indicate the maximum star value and whether this value will be applied to each one. That is to say, if the user selects 2 stars when entering a restaurant, the stored value will be 2. In this case, if the attribute is read-only, as we can see in the list of restaurants, its value will be displayed using stars. However, if it's an editable field, as in the detail, stars will be displayed to the user, who will then select the desired number of stars. Let's see all this in GeneXus. I select the restaurant. Note that I've already changed the control type value to rating. We remove SD maps and leave the default value so that it isn't displayed as a map. There we see it as a standard list. The attribute is displayed using stars. And if we edit a restaurant's data, since we haven't done anything yet, the rating is a numeric value. So now we open the general section. Select Edit, and in Rating, and we change the edit control type that is the standard value to rating. We leave those values, including the maximum number of stars, which is 5. In the emulator, we see that the stars are displayed, and we select the number we want. For example, 3. We save, and if we return now, it will show 3 stars. More information about these controls can be found in our wiki. So, for example, we can enter an attribute by scanning a barcode or QR code. By configuring SD Scanner as control type, a scan button will be added next to the attribute. Pressing it will open the reader installed on the device, which is not read-only either. To scan multiple codes at once, we can use the Scanner API. Later on, we will talk about the APIs that come with GeneXus. In this case, the application will be automatically integrated with the device camera. You can find examples of all the types of controls in the GeneXus wiki.